So today, the topics we're going to cover is a bit of an overview of the transition arrangements and where we're at. Moving on to some of the approval, the two options for approval pathways that we have. The ROVR system, the IT system. Hopefully you're all familiar with the application system we use now, the Road Vehicle Regulator system, which handles all the applications for vehicle type approvals, concessional RAV entry applications, testing facilities, all the other different types of applications available through the road vehicle standards legislation. The department's expectations, applications, declarations, and the information required to be held. Component type approvals, how to use them, and a little bit of information on those. There was more information that we covered in the previous. The compliance and enforcement will be giving a presentation on their powers and the sort of things that we'll be looking at through new legislation. So the road vehicle standards legislation commenced on 1 July 2021. It's currently coming towards the end of a 2-year transition period. It's the legislation sets the national road vehicle standards to set the expectations of the community for safety, environmental, and theft. So under the Motor Vehicle Standards Act, of course, you would be aware the vehicles were self-certified. Vehicles were fitted with a VSB1 plate, which was the old Vehicle Standards Bulletin Revision 5. After 1 July this year, there'll be no opportunity to add those plates to vehicles any longer, and vehicle will need to be on the RAV to be able to provide those vehicles for the first time in Australia. New requirements for trailer manufacturers. So as I mentioned there before, there's 2 options to get vehicles both imported and supplied to the market in Australia. First is the vehicle type approval option or pathway, unlimited number of vehicles that can be imported and added to the RAV. There are additional requirements for vehicle type approval, such as conformity production system, control of the manufacturing process, and some other requirements. And we're also need to be a little bit more strict on the types of information held that show compliance to the national road vehicle standards. The concessional RAV entry is the other option, or the pathway available to import vehicles as a concessional arrangement. So in that concessional RAV pathway, they are limited. You are limited to 4 vehicles in a 12-month period. The application is made on a vehicle by vehicle basis. ROVR does allow you now to put in an application to cover 4 vehicles or up to 4 vehicles where they are the same type, as in make, model, and build date, to simplify the process for both applicants and the department, assessing the applications once, and yeah, those applications can be done a little bit easier, but that is only if they are of the same vehicle make and model, same type. The vehicle type approval, in that process, we have implemented the requirements for low ATM trailers in the simplest way possible, and we've specified, or we've decided that a type of vehicle is the vehicle category and the vehicle make. So normally vehicle types will be split between different models, but in the low ATM trailer type, we recognise that it's a massive change for this sector of industry. So we are allowing the process is that a single vehicle type, as an example, a TB category trailer could cover a 2-axle box trailer, a 2-axle boat trailer, and also a 2-axle or a 3-axle caravan. So all of those different models can be covered under a single approval, even though the design of the vehicle is quite different, as long as they fit within that same category. So the vehicle categories of TB between 750 kilos up to 3.5 tonne. All trailers of that type could be on a single application and a single approval. And when you're making an application for a vehicle type approval, there are options or ability to add multiple different model names. The model names can be anything that the manufacturer decides to call them. If you could have it as simple as a 1-axle, 2-axle, 3-axle, or you can have multiple models such as a 1-axle box trailer, a 2-axle box trailer, a 3-axle box trailer, and then split it up for a caravan, horse float, other things like that. If you manufacture multiple different types of vehicle within that category. So the transition period for the road vehicle standards legislation is coming to an end, as I mentioned. The applications to import through the old vehicle import system ended on 30th of April, and import approvals cannot be granted after the 31st of May. So any applications that are in the system, if they are currently requiring further information, then if that information is not provided in the next few days, then an approval won't be able to be granted. Come 30 June, all vehicles must be on the RAV before they're provided for the first time. So after 30th of June, it's the last opportunity to provide a vehicle for the first time in Australia if the vehicle is not on the RAV. And then moving into the new legislation, all the applications are through the Rover system, whether it's for concessional RAV or vehicle type approval applications, and the vehicles must be on the RAV before they can be provided. So there's a link at the bottom, or information on the bottom there for the transitional arrangements. Gives a bit of an overview on what's required, and so that changes through the system. But as I mentioned, the transitional arrangements is coming to an end. The department has also created some guidance about provision to the market. So when a vehicle is classified as provided for the first time, it also gives the guidance that we've got gives options on how to add NBSA plated trailers to the RAV if they haven't been provided by the 30th of June. So if they're being provided for the first time, and I'll ask if Andrea can add that link into the chat for me. So the Rover IT system, this is an image of the front page of the Rover IT system, which has the ability to log in, set up your portal, log in, make applications through the system. But also from this page, or if you scroll down on the main Rover page, there's also the ability to look at other vehicle type approvals that are in force. Also testing facilities, registered automotive workshops, component type approvals, and model reports. But model reports aren't relevant for low ATM trailers. So all the different published information for different approvals is available from the Rover page. The department's created a video for how to make applications, how to submit applications or complete applications for low ATM trailers. So there's that's video. It's a few-minute video available on the vehicle type approval, the low ATM trailer page. It's a bit of a background. It gives some explanation of how to complete the application, the sort of things that you need to consider, and just a few screenshots or a video of the system if you need to see what sort of things you might be required to complete as part of the application. There has been some minor changes since that video was created in regard to questions about quality management systems, but they're actually easier to complete now than they used to be. We now ask a question about we have published a checklist for vehicle type approval for quality management systems, and we ask the question if your quality system meets the requirements or the expectations that the department expects to see in a quality system, and a yes or no answer to that. So we're leaving it to you to self-assess that we have documented the requirements we expect to see, and you're making a statement, a declaration that your quality system meets the requirements in that checklist, and therefore if we did come out, when we do come out to do an inspection on your premises or your processes, then your documented quality system would reflect the processes that are in place in your manufacturing. So the low ATM trailer application, as I mentioned, it's a reasonably simple application. This is for the vehicle type approval. The main things that we require to be completed in the application is to identify the vehicle type, which is the vehicle make and the category. Identify all the models within the vehicle type, which allows a lot of models, like multiple models within your approval. And like I said, you can identify models in any way you like, whether you split them up into many models, or when you're entering the design and manufacturing control, it asks for information about the level of control you have over the processes, and whether you have direct control or whether you have access to the information about the control and any changes in the design. So there's questions in the application about that. Next is to identify the applicable ADRs. Other vehicle type approvals for trucks and heavy trailers and vehicles, road vehicles, other cars, require, in addition to identifying the applicable ADRs, those vehicles are required to complete a compliance information form for each particular ADR to provide information of how they show compliance. That information is not required for a low ATM trailer applicant. It has the ability to keep it simpler and not require that information, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to hold that information to support your application. And then the last piece of the application is the declaration, which is declaring that all the information is true and accurate, and that you hold, you're able to meet the conditions of approval and other things like that that are required by the application. So this is a screenshot of the published list of approvals. So on this is the vehicle type approvals, and in this image we've limited the category to TB category trailers. So you're able to see the approval numbers of any TB trailers that have been granted. You can order them by the last updated date. Most of them will be enforced unless they have been revoked or surrendered or suspended, sorry. And as you can see from these, the approval number, the model is TB. However, when you go into look in approval, you can see multiple models under that approval, which allows many different models. Current vehicle type approval volume. There's approximately 4,000 vehicle type approvals in the system at the moment. There's about 500 applications in progress. We've got 124 TA category, 570 TB, and 150 TC that are less than 4.5 tonne ATM. That number has increased by about 50 from when this presentation was done a few weeks ago at the Caravan Industry Association meeting. And apologies for anyone that was at that, because they are seeing some duplicate information, but we'll try and move through this part of it reasonably quickly. So we do have a dedicated RAV page, guidance page, that covers all the information that you need to enter vehicles onto the RAV. So we'll provide a link to that in a minute. But the guide, this includes the guide to RAV for vehicle type approval holders, providing all the information on that process of how you go through creating yourself as a VIN submitter or a RAV submitter, sorry. There's the guide to submitting VINs to NEVDIS, which is how you load VINs onto the NEVDIS database, which is a prerequisite to adding vehicles onto the RAV. On that page, on the RAV page, there is also a template for RAV submissions, which includes a CSV file, and there's also an XML file generator, which allows you to put your information into the web page, and then generate an XML file to make your RAV submission process a little bit simpler, and also less chances of having a rejection. We'll move through the presentation and we'll come back to questions at the end. If you can make a note of the slide number that you have the question on, and we'll come back to that later. So on the RAV, this is how information is presented on the RAV. So you can see the RAV entry date is the date that the vehicle has been entered on the RAV and paid. The RAV entry, the pathway subcategory, the approval number that aligns with the vehicle type, the approval holder, vehicle category, make, model, build date, which the build date can be different to the RAV entry date. The GVM, sorry, this is a combined field. GVM is what it is for passenger vehicles and, for commercial vehicles. But for a trailer, it's an ATM, the GTM, and TMS, and also the details of the person who entered the vehicle onto the RAV. The RAV's currently got about 1.8 million vehicles on it. There's 37,000 trailers and 20,000 of those are low ATM. And there's some numbers that are split up by category, which is approximate volumes that we've got on the RAV at the moment. The department's expectations. So as I mentioned, the simple application for a vehicle type approval is supported by the applicant's declaration. And the declaration needs to be supported by information held by the applicant, like if you're making a declaration and you don't have some sort of information to confirm that information or that declaration is true and accurate, then that's when there could be concerns raised or issues if we do come out to look at documents that you have and how a particular vehicle complies, and you don't hold those documents. The types of information that support a vehicle type approval is the testing results from an approved facility. So any testing that is done for a vehicle, for a specific ADR, needs to be from an approved testing facility. An approval or other document, essentially this allows ECE approvals where the vehicle has been assessed by a contracting party to the 1958 agreement in accordance with an ECE regulation. But generally you would see these as a capital E in a circle on a vehicle. And generally we will also require the applicant or the approval holder to have a copy of these approval documents. So I know there is some light suppliers in Australia that are actually allowing or supplying a copy of the approval to manufacturers who need it, so they were able to use that as in supportive evidence for a vehicle type approval. The next one down there is the road vehicle component type approval. That's an alternative to the ECE approval. So the approval holder, a person can apply to get a road vehicle component type approval, which makes it simpler for the vehicle type approval applicant to refer to a single number that you are able to look up in the system and see that the vehicle is, or the component is approved, has been assessed by the department already and granted an approval to show that it already complies. The approval for those documents will show, for those components, sorry, will show the ADRs that those components are approved to. Next one down is the declaration made by the person. So the declaration is the simplest option, but it's not appropriate in all scenarios. So the declaration may be used when you're making measurements of the vehicle, simple measurements like in ADR 13, or like as lighting positions and lighting layout. It'd be impractical to have to take a vehicle to an approved testing facility to do light measurements and count the number of lights on a vehicle. So that's when the declaration made by the person is an appropriate option. Similar to ADR 43, when you're checking dimensions of the vehicle are within the ADR specification, then a declaration is a suitable option in that space. The next couple on the list, the approved model report and existing vehicle type approval. Generally, you're not going to be using those sort of things. An approved model report is only, we cannot approve a model report for something that's under 4.5 tonne in a trailer space. So it's not applicable in this space. And it'd be very rare that an existing vehicle type approval, it's generally the process for a vehicle that's undergoing a second stage of modification. So where the first stage approval holder has an approval, and then you're doing a modification to that approval and using their extent of compliance or their evidence of compliance, essentially, based on what they've submitted. without modifying those components, but very rare in trailer space to do the second stage of manufacture. Finally, any matter or thing specified in applicable national road vehicle standard, then this sort of option is, there's a few ADRs that refer to certificates being able to be used to show compliance. Most relevant in this space for trailers is the approved calculations. So those approved defined terms in the ADRs, and where the ADR allows the approved calculation, then that's an option for showing compliance to the ADRs. Component type approvals. They're like I mentioned, it's a way that the manufacturer of that component can get an approval for that component. The department does an assessment on those components and will issue, or the testing or whatever evidence of compliance that component type approval submits with their application, and then we'll grant an approval and publish that approval when after the assessment's been done. Not all components are eligible as components, so the requirement is that a vehicle is able to be assessed to the requirements in an ADR, like where the ADR allows assessment of that type of component separate to the broader system of the vehicle. So yeah, they're not always available, and sometimes there's no specific testing requirements for a vehicle to have to show compliance to, or a component to have to show compliance to. So there have been some scenarios where applications haven't been able to be approved because we're not able to make those sort of decisions on those vehicles or components. I'll pass over now to Andrew from our compliance and enforcement team to give a bit of an overview of what their processes are.
The topics I wish to share with you today include our compliance and enforcement approach, vehicle type approval holder obligations, low ATM targeted compliance monitoring results, new enforcement powers and tools, and desktop review and site inspection. Our approach to compliance enforcement recognises there are varying degrees of compliant and non-compliant behaviour, and for this we've adapted our levels to ensure that each approach has a sufficient obligation and directive or response. So firstly, we would like everybody to be voluntary compliant. So that means you either get some assistance from us and we're able to educate you and clarify, or provide relevant documentation that will share and educate you accordingly. Our next tier is assisted. We may provide an explanation of consequences through an advisory notice, or seek the approval holder to voluntarily suspend or revoke their approval if they're unable to demonstrate compliance with approval conditions. Following assisted is directed. This tier, it's a way that we could possibly issue a penalty infringement notice, or consider an enforceable undertaking, or vary, suspend, or revoke an approval. Our last tier, and this is where we don't see many people actually ever achieving, but it has eventuated in some circumstances, is to deter opportunistic behaviour with the full force of the law. So, vehicle type approvals and your regulatory obligations. As Wayne mentioned before, when applying for a low ATM trailer, BTA or CTA, you may be required to attach supporting information that demonstrates compliance with National Road Vehicle Standards, and in this case, it will be Australian design rules, when submitting an application. However, it is expected all declared requirements can be met. Declarations included in VTAs and CTA applications states that you have access to all associated supporting information and are able to meet all approval conditions, including the ability to access conformity of production and design control documentation and access to these facilities. including test facilities if applicable. So that means not only if you are importing some of these vehicles, that you're able to obtain from the overseas manufacturer all documentation that's associated with the manufacturing of these trailers, and that you're able to gain access for the department inspectors to undertake site visits to that facility. Typically, for a standard VTA, the applicable approval conditions are Section 26, compliance with National Road Vehicle Standards, Section 27, condition about conformity of production systems, Section 28, condition about notifying the Secretary of errors in the RAV entries, Section 29, condition about providing information, etc., to the Secretary or an inspector upon request, Section 30, condition about keeping up-to-date records of supporting information. So we may request certain information and it needs to be produced in a timely manner. You either have it or you have access to it. Recently, compliance enforcement team undertook a compliance and monitoring activity as outlined in our compliance strategy 2021 to 2023. We monitored 10 low ATM approval holders. We issued them requests to provide supporting information so they could demonstrate compliance with only 2 pieces of information of their approval. One of them was compliance with ADR 6202 and Section 27 of their approval, which was conformity of production, including design change control. Unfortunately, not one of the approval holders were compliant. Some of the response deficiencies included, but not limited to, approval holders assumed they complied as they had operated under the Motor Vehicle Standards Act using the Vehicle Standards Bulletin 1, Revision 5. Some approval holders had difficulty demonstrating a genuine connection to the overseas manufacturer where applicable. Approval holders were not aware of the defined term supporting information. This is a defined term in the Road Vehicle Standards Rule, and it actually specifies it's quite a broad term. It means that you can supply us technical drawings, approvals, test reports, processes, procedures of the manufacturing, any checklist that you undertake to ensure that vehicle is compliant before adding it to the RAV. Some approval holders could not provide supporting information when requested, and approval holders declared they had a detailed quality management system specific to the trailer being manufactured or important. And we found that when we first asked, they were unable to provide any of this documentation, and through clarification and giving them some time, some did. Unfortunately, some people had to voluntarily revoked their approvals because they were never able to provide this information in the future. So I'd like to give you an overview of our new powers and enforcement tools that are actually under the RVSA legislation. It gives the department a range of modern compliance enforcement tools and investigative powers. Our new enforcement tools allow us to examine or observe an activity, inspect, examine, measure, or test anything, inspect, take extracts from, or make copies of documents, photograph, film, or record anything, remove and test samples, search a premises, secure evidence of contravention, and our investigation powers allow us, similarly to compliance monitoring, for investigation alleged offences rather than monitoring and then organisation level of compliance. And our new enforcement tools allow us to seek civil penalties. These are court-ordered directives or court-issued financial penalties. Our new enforcement tools also allow us to issue infringement notices, which are a financial penalty. We're also allowed to accept enforceable undertakings. Enforceable undertakings are the framework for the acceptance of an enforceable undertaking relating to the compliance with legislative provisions. So that means we don't design, if you're telling us that you're going to rectify a matter within a certain time, that framework needs to specify how you're going to, the stages that you're going to undertake to establish how many vehicles are affected, what needs to be done to rectify the non-compliance, the time frame that these will be rectified, and if you don't, we'll be monitoring that and ensuring that those time frames are kept. So if you don't adhere to that enforceable undertaking, there could be potentially some court action taken against you. And lastly, we're able to seek court injunctions. It is an equitable remedy in the form of a special court order that compels a party to do or refrain from specific acts. So if the court may say that you're unable to build these vehicles anymore, they may specify that these vehicles cannot have these components fitted to them. It is a whole range of ability to prevent those vehicles reaching the Australian market. So what to expect when inspectors seek information or conduct a site inspection. Low ATM vehicle type approval holders are a focus area for compliance enforcement. Your compliance with RVS legislation may be proactively monitored. If your compliance is monitored, you'll be requested in writing under a statutory condition of your approval to provide us with particular information regarding how you're complying with all of your approval conditions. If we do decide to undertake a site visit to monitor your compliance, we may pre-arrange this with you. We may and give you a lot of time to prepare. We may do it at short notice, it might be 1 or 2 days, or we may just visit unannounced. For more information about compliance monitoring can be found at our Public Guidance Inspection, Monitoring and Investigation document. Now I'd like to share with you some common errors we're identifying with vehicle details being entered on the RAV. Since July 2021, we have seen some common errors occurring when it comes to entering vehicle details onto the RAV. The most common of these are entering incorrect prefixes. So as you can see in that example, underneath that first cube, people are entering the incorrect prefix. So it should be VTA. People are entering all sorts of things. They're entering STA, XTA. It could be a typo, but that is not correct. Your approval, vehicle type approval, or starts with VTA, and a component type approval starts with CTA. Additionally, we're also seeing issues with the suffix of an approval. So underneath that second cube, you can see that people are removing those zeros. So it should be a 6-digit at the end after the prefix. Those digits are part of your approval. Removing them is not what your approval is actually for. Other issues we're seeing is that people are entering VINs more than once. People are entering an alternate vehicle category. So if the approval stipulates that it's a TB or TA category, they're entering TC. People are entering the incorrect make and model other than specified on the approval documentation. And most concerningly, why does this matter? The RAV is an authoritative source that is relied upon us and other regulators, law enforcement, insurance companies, owners, and potential future owners of vehicles. Errors on the RAV can result in original equipment manufacturers not being able to add the original vehicle to the RAV. It makes it difficult for future or current owners to register the vehicle, and it can be very difficult for an insurance company to undertake evaluations or actually insure that vehicle if those details are incorrect. And other possible impacts are to business operators. There may be delays in providing vehicles to the customers if they're unable to be registered, if they're unable to be insured, and if those details need to be fixed up on the RAV. That can take a few days. And most importantly, it's a non-compliance with RVS legislation. So, your obligations. Your obligations as a vehicle type approval holder is required to comply with the conditions of your approval. These include ensuring that the vehicle is compliant at the time it is added to the RAD. You cannot, if you receive an order, you cannot add a vehicle to the RAV if it hasn't been built yet. If the vehicle is partially through construction, you cannot add that vehicle to the RAV. It needs to be completed, it needs to be compliant before you add vehicle details to the RAV. And failing to comply with these conditions of approval may be a breach of the RVSA legislation. But if you make a mistake by entering incorrect details to the RAV, we prefer you to voluntarily comply and tell us what happened. If you do make a mistake, explain how it occurred to us. Explain what action will be taken to prevent or mitigate future reoccurrences, and what action did you take to rectify any vehicles in the fleet. Often this is done through a recall process. Generally, if this occurs, we will note and record the potential of non-compliance, but may not take any further action. If it constantly occurs, we may take enforcement actions. This could include infringement notices, civil penalties, suspension or revocation of approvals, or referral for prosecution. For any more information in regards to compliance and enforcement or adding vehicles to the RAV, you can go to our department's webpage, and there is actually a link to compliance and enforcement. Or if you do come across any non-compliances and wish to report them to us, you're able to go to that. You can email us, but there's also a link on our compliance and enforcement page where you can submit an anonymous report if you wish to inform us about the situation that you've come across. And there's a great deal of information in regards to entering vehicles on the RAV, which would be of great assistance to a lot of people. It gives you a template, what information needs to be captured, and there's also guides of what information you should include in that template before submitting it to us.
Just a couple of things about recalls, just to make sure people are aware of recall requirements and recall obligations. So under the new road vehicle standards legislation, it has moved the requirements for recalls into our legislation, which was previously done by the ACCC, which only covered consumer goods. Now the recalls legislation, or the recalls section of the legislation, covers all road vehicles and road vehicle components, all approved road vehicle components. So yeah, as it shows on the screen there's two options: either a voluntary recall, which is where anyone in the supply chain chooses to either fix a safety or non-compliance issue, or recall something that will or may cause injury for a safety issue. The other option is compulsory recall, so where the minister becomes aware or is satisfied that one or more supplier is not taking sufficient action to prevent injury or to rectify non-compliance, then the compulsory recall may be commenced in that scenario. Who's responsible for taking the recall? So if you supply vehicles to the Australian market, then you are the one that is responsible to undertake the recall. So you're considered a supplier if you manufacture, import, distribute, retail, supply, or resupply road vehicles or approve road vehicle components to the Australian market by any of those sale, exchange, lease, hire purchase. So when something does present a safety issue or doesn't comply with standards, there's processes available on the recalls webpage on how to go through the recalls process, and there's guidance on the recalls webpage about how to do that. And finally, who's responsible? So like I mentioned, if you import, sell components outside normal distribution channels, then you may not have any relationship to the actual manufacturer. As an example, concessional RVS trailers, if you're buying 4 trailers a year from an overseas company, bringing those in, putting those vehicles onto the RAV under a concessional RAV option, and then providing or supplying those vehicles, then if something became a known issue of those trailers, as in one of them, the drawbar broke off, and you found that the reason for that was a quality issue as part of their supply or their manufacturing process, then you would be responsible for recalling any other vehicles provided, supplied through those mechanisms. So when you are supplying vehicles in trade or commerce, then the recall provisions do apply to you.